I'd like to introduce Ronda. And let's see, we're delighted to have her here from Eastern Oregon University and some of her teacher candidates. They will be sharing some of the exciting changes that are happening at Eastern Oregon. She is an associate professor of education, specializing in literacy instruction, specifically prevention and intervention of reading difficulties. Prior to arriving at Eastern Oregon, Ronda was a K-12 teacher for 19 years. She taught kindergarten, Title I reading, middle school language arts, 4th and 5th grade, and ended her K-12 teaching career as a reading specialist, where she discovered a strong interest in developing systems for improving outcomes for struggling readers. Ronda is also the mother of a child who has dyslexia. Her passion to do better for struggling readers and prepare the next generation of teachers led her to the University of Oregon's Department of Special Ed, where she received her PhD in 2016. We thank her for her vision and persistence, because we know what she is doing is not easy. So we're here tonight to learn from her about the process and to maybe help others who want to do the same for their teacher candidates. So please help me welcome Ronda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you about what I have started to put together at Eastern Oregon University and give some of my reading clinic graduates and new mentors an opportunity to share their experience as well. And I will also have one of our undergrads will be joining us at 8 tonight to share his experience in pre-service training. And I think you'll notice that his experience will be quite different from the 3 women that you'll hear before him. So I'm going to share my screen. Wait. All right, are you seeing my PowerPoint presentation? Thank you. Okay. So I was going to have you put your role in the chat. So Lisa already did that for me. So thank you. It was nice to see where everyone was from and all of the different roles that are present here tonight. So it's really exciting to see so many people interested in what's happening at our little university. So with that, this is what I have planned for tonight. I want you to feel free to jump into the chat and ask questions as I go. Shaheen and Lisa will be kind of manning that for me because I really can't do both. I tried, but it doesn't work that well. So on my agenda, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I got here, what my path to the science of reading was, and then because I think that might be important to those of you who are in higher ed and trying to make some changes in your programs, just to know where I came from and what fuels me. So I'll do a quick, I know I'll be preaching to the choir, but I'll do a quick review of some of the issues with reading proficiency, both in the US and Oregon, and then talk a little more about where we're at with higher ed and the science of reading. And then I'll get into what we are doing at Eastern Oregon University to answer this call for change that has come out. You'll get a chance to listen to and talk with some of my teachers that went through our original teacher prep programs several years ago, and then the reading clinic, and you'll get to hear their experiences and then get to hear the experience of one of my pre-service teachers who's currently going through the program. And then I'll talk just briefly about what I have planned for the future, when I have a spare moment, and then give you a chance to ask some questions. So this is lots of important pictures of my family, but I'll tell you why those things are important as I talk about my path to getting here. So I completed my undergrad preparation in elementary education at Boise State University back in 1992. And at that time, I was really well versed in whole language. I thought I was prepared to just share my love of literature, and it just made so much sense that to me intuitively that children learn to read and the way they learn to speak. And partly that was because I was a precocious reader. So it made sense, like, oh yeah, that must be how it works. So I left in 92 fully confident that I could teach children to read. And I got my first teaching job teaching kindergarten. I had 5 students in a tiny little town in Eastern Oregon called Ukiah. We had a great time. I'm 100% sure those children learned nothing from me, other than we read a lot of books, we sang a lot of songs, we baked cookies, we had a fabulous time. But as far as teaching these children how to read, I wasn't able to do that. That was a pretty frustrating experience for me. I would spend hours and hours trying to find the right trade books to teach the letter of the week I was trying to teach that week. And it just was very haphazard in my planning. I started to realize that I couldn't sustain that approach, and it really wasn't getting me anywhere. But in the back of my mind, I was like, oh yeah, my professors told me about this, that there, some children just aren't quite ready to read. So I just chalked it up to these 5 kindergartners weren't ready to take that on yet. So after that year, I was offered a position at my hometown, and I was offered the position of a Title I reading teacher. And I was excited to get to go back to my hometown and share what I had learned. And I started off in that position pretty confident again. But as I started to expose them all to great literature and just infuse some in the moment phonics instruction, I couldn't see any growth in these kids that I was working with. And that frustration started to build. But within this job, because it was Title I was told I needed to start right away on my reading endorsement program. So I very excitedly started, ironically, at Eastern Oregon University to get my reading endorsement. And that first summer, I took a couple of classes, and one of those classes was a practicum class where they had kind of a reading clinic going on, where kids came in from the community and we were assigned to those children and were supposed to help them learn to read. We were given lots and lots of great trade books, but zero instruction on what to do to teach these kids to read. And honestly, that just got really frustrating for me. I thought, this is a reading endorsement. I should be learning how to teach kids how to read. So meanwhile, let's talk, I'll get to these pictures. Trent, it was my oldest, and he was just finishing kindergarten that same year. And I kind of knew on some level that something wasn't quite right. It didn't seem like he was progressing the way he should. But his teachers told me, oh, he has great print concepts. He has fantastic vocabulary. You just give him some time, he'll be fine. And so I did. But then as he started into first grade, I realized, you know what, I'm not going to continue at Eastern Oregon University. I'm going to go back to my alma mater, Boise State. Why I thought that I would learn something different than there the second time, I don't know. But I did go back there and got a master's in reading. And that took me about 4 years to complete, including my thesis. And all that time, Trent is struggling to learn to read. I'm getting more and more frustrated because here I am, a teacher, almost have a master's in reading, and still don't know how to help him or the countless children that I had in my classes that were struggling to read as well. So I just was continually frustrated, I guess is the best way to put that. And Lisa talked about all the different positions. So I left Title I because that was really not satisfying. I went to middle school, really loved middle school, but then a 5th grade position came open, and it was actually the year Trent was in 5th grade, and it's a tiny school. So I had him in my class, and I got to see head on what was happening, but still wasn't able to make any progress with him or any of the other struggling readers in his class. So we had him tested at OHSU before that. So we already had a diagnosis of dyslexia, but the doctors at OHSU couldn't really give us any guidance on what to do or how to help him, or even where to look for resources. So that was in the back of my mind, but it really was, I had it also in the back of my mind, my professors telling me, oh, dyslexia really isn't a thing. It's just an umbrella term for reading difficulties. It doesn't give you any kind of diagnosis that can drive instruction. So, don't really worry about it. So that I was fighting my own internal battle with Trent and his dyslexia. So in my professional life all this time, after feeling such lack of success, I just spent a lot of time trying to find information and running into brick walls. So fast forward to Trent at 15 years old, I showed up at the International Reading Association conference, which was in Portland that year. And I saw on the program a session with Susan Barton on dyslexia. And honestly, I went into it thinking, yeah, I'm going to go listen to her, but I was a skeptic. 15 minutes into it, she's going through all of the symptoms of dyslexia, and I'm checking off everyone for Trent. Before it was over, I was in tears. Luckily, I had friends with me who were holding me up, but I was in tears because I was frustrated that I hadn't known not just what dyslexia was and those symptoms, but Susan was also talking about what we do about it, and that there was a very concrete way for us to teach children how to read, even those who were struggling mightily, like Trent was. And that was just such a pivotal moment for me. And it really led me down the path where I am today. And I put my father, who's right here, and my husband on the top in these pictures too, because that night I got on the phone with my husband and I was telling him all the symptoms that Susan had shared. And he stops me and he says, Rhonda, that was me. And that was like such a crazy moment of realizing, oh yeah, there's that heredity piece. Well, then as I'm talking to my father, he's telling me he didn't read until he was in the 5th grade. So there's definitely some family markers for dyslexia in our family. So those 3 men really have everything to do with why I started down this path. And then these 2 little boys who are Trent's little boys have a huge part of what I'm doing too. They drive my passion to make sure that they have teachers who know what to do if one of them happens to have dyslexia themselves. The other picture, this is my daughter holding them. She's a special education teacher. And remember, I graduated in '92. She was a baby at the time. And I learned whole language. She graduated in 2014 and she learned balanced literacy. So we really didn't have very different experiences in teacher preparation. And so I'm here for her and those students who are coming through our programs to make sure they don't have that same sense of frustration that I did as I went through. So that's the long story of how I got where I am. So let's talk more about what's happening in reading in the United States. As I said, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we know that not very many kids are proficient in reading. In 2017, there were 36%. 2019 wasn't much better. I mean, minutely better. And we know after 2019, because of COVID, we probably have even worse statistics to look at, which is very frustrating. It's frustrating to show that flat line, that not much has changed over a lot of years. And this only goes back to 2009, but we know that even farther back than that, that those scores have not changed. We know that minority students are at risk for poor reading scores, but special populations are the furthest behind in reading. So our English language learners, our students with disabilities, and students free and reduced price lunches have worse outcomes than most other children. That makes it an equity issue. We need to make sure that we're providing instruction that can meet the needs of all of these children, regardless of their status. I think what's another important thing to remember is that it's not just these kids that are struggling. I wanted to highlight this. 30% of struggling readers come from households with at least one college-educated parent. So it's not just a problem for those other groups. It's a problem for all of us, and we all need to be making an effort to change what's happening in higher ed and in schools. So I stole this from Oregon Kids Read. This is Oregon's statistics, not much better than the United States, not better at all. These are the percentage of Oregon third graders who are proficient in reading, and this was in 2019. So again, we can imagine how things have changed since then, and who probably was most impacted by the issues that came about due to COVID. And if we don't do something, if we don't come up with a solution that can reach those children, we know that 75% of kids who don't read proficiently by third grade don't ever reach reading proficiency. So that doesn't change for them, it stays flat. We know that 54% decrease in likelihood that those struggling readers will go on to college. And we know that 93 million adults in this nation are reading at or below basic levels. So we've got a problem. We've got something that we really need to have a systemic answer to. And I think the most important thing about this is this next statistic, that we know that if we do the right things, 95% of kids should be able to read. They're cognitively capable of learning to read. Here's what's interesting about this. 30% of our kids are going to, 30% of our kids are going to learn despite what we do. So if we're using balanced literacy in the classroom, 30% will learn to read. If you're doing any other approach, those 30% are going to learn to read. But we know that 50% of kids will learn to read if we have a really good, high quality tier 1 instruction. So now we're up to 80% of kids. And that's just making sure that our tier 1 is well done and is good. We still are going to have 15% of kids that are going to need some additional time and support, perhaps beyond tier 1 into tier 2. And 5% of kids are going to struggle with some severe cognitive impairments. They're going to require some really intense interventions that go above and beyond what we might do for the other 95% of kids. So it's not an impossible task. I think for years as teachers, we were kind of taught there were always going to be some kids that wouldn't learn. And now we know that is not true. And so we've got to change the way we're preparing teachers. We've got to change the way we are approaching reading instruction in the classroom. So we know the key is high quality structured literacy approach that for all kids, because that will reach the most children. We're going to reach those 30% who would be served no matter what, but we're also going to reach that other 50%. And we're going to reach that 15% that need a little bit more with some more intensive interventions. But what that means to be high quality structured literacy, it's got to be explicit and systematic and sequential. So unlike the way I was teaching when I started in kindergarten, where it was just sort of haphazardly choosing, okay, this week maybe we'll do the letter A, and maybe next week we'll do the letter M. There was no rhyme or reason. We know it's so important that it is very highly structured and sequenced to make sure that we're hitting all of the skills that they need. And that includes all of the big 5. So that big 5 is phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. All 5 of those things have to be taught in an explicit and systematic way. They need cumulative practice that's ongoing. So we're coming back around all the time so that those children are getting enough practice and review for it to stick. It has to have a lot of student-teacher interaction. It can't be like I'm doing right now, just talking at you. It has to be things that are happening back and forth. We also know that it's important for children to see good examples and non-examples when they're learning. Decodable text is important when they're practicing those newly learned skills. And then we also have to make sure we're providing prompt and corrective feedback. So those are kind of the big ideas that are around that high quality structured literacy approach that we have to make sure our pre-service and in-service teachers are able to deliver. The bad news is 60% of elementary teachers have never been trained in these strategies for teaching the big five. 95% of our elementary classrooms don't spend enough time providing direct instruction on all of the English phonemes and their graphing correspondences. And 80% of early elementary teachers are still encouraging kids to use pictures or context clues to identify unfamiliar words. And if you're in here, you probably are familiar with Emily Hanford's work. She really brought that to light. She showed us that we can't do that. Those are the kinds of strategies that poor readers use, not good readers. So super important that that is hammered home to both the pre-service and in-service teachers that I work with. I thought this quote by Mark Seidenberg was important. We know that there are lots of methods that are used to teach children to read, and there's lots of science to back that up, but what we're seeing is inconsistent with that science and inconsistent with what we know about how kids learn to read. And so really that education of teachers at the pre-service and in-service levels is super important to make sure kids are getting what they need and learning in a way that makes sense with how our brains learn to read. Higher education is a part of the problem, and that's why we're all here tonight. These statistics are frustrating. Most schools of education don't prepare educators to teach reading. And I can say that I was part of that problem for a while as well. But 31% of teacher prep programs don't devote any coursework to reading science. 39% of undergrad elementary ed programs provide instruction in all 5 components of reading, so only 39%. So 60% plus are not. 46% of undergrad elementary education programs teach phonemic awareness. We know now that that's such a key element, and less than half of programs are even teaching about phonemic awareness. And to be honest, I didn't learn anything about phonemic awareness until Trent was 15, so 10 years after I had started teaching, which is just crazy to think that that wasn't even a term I knew. And 23% of graduate elementary ed programs teach scientifically based reading methods. So not good statistics. So we have to do better. We know better and we have to do better. So this quote by Louisa Moats, I think, is super important. Despite what we know about, and despite the increasingly sophisticated methods of research, including brain research, we can see what's happening in the brain, and that corroborates everything that was being said even in the year 2000 when the National Reading Panel came out. And even though we have all of this science to back up what was being said then, it's not necessarily very often included in teacher prep programs. So bringing that to light and bringing that into our programs is such an important piece of what our job is in higher ed. So I would like you to take a second and interact with me and talk about your experiences a little bit in the chat. If you were a teacher, did your initial prep prepare you to teach all kids to read? If you're a parent, how many of your child's teachers were prepared to meet your child's needs? If you're an administrator, I don't know if we have any in here, I hope we do. Do you feel prepared to support your teachers in teaching all children to read? And if you're higher ed faculty, do you feel prepared to support your pre-service teachers in learning to teach children to read using scientifically validated methods? So I'm going to give you a second to pop in and tell us a little bit about what your experience was. Not even a SPED master's, and no, not higher ed faculty. Graduate and initial prep didn't prepare me. Yes, Karen is continuing her education informally. She's taking letters with me, Karen Gomez. So big hand for her. Didn't know any of this. Higher ed. Yes, I hear you, Shaheen. Yeah. Yeah. If you're reading along with these, you'll see a theme. Linnea, same experience. Yeah. Awesome. So I think you can see that across the board, most of us had similar experiences. I know that sometimes it's different in special education. At the University of Oregon, our special ed pre-service teachers were learning all of the good things. And obviously in the school psych program, they were learning those good things too. But what is odd is that divide between special and general ed. And I didn't know it existed until I got into my PhD program. And then it was very enlightening that the two weren't talking to each other. They weren't, nobody was playing together. All right, thank you so much for weighing in. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your experiences too, because I know that many of us come from that same frustrating background. But now we're all here and we're learning more and we're moving forward, and that's important. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my journey through higher ed. And I was hired at EOU in 2014. And I'm going to be real with you. It was not until 2020 that I really felt like we were starting to make some progress forward. It was always in the back of my mind that that was what I wanted to do, but I also walked into a faculty who was balanced literacy trained, and they had worked hard at that and believed in what they were talking about. And since we've started down this path, it's been fun to have those conversations with them and to find out where our common ground is, because I think that's something that it's so easy to be dichotomous, and sometimes it's hard to see that there are places where we share the same sorts of ideas. But here's my path. I was hired in 2014 as an elementary ed generalist. It was actually the third position I applied for, and I joke with them that they finally hired me so I would quit applying. And they did, and it's been great. But from 2014 through 2017, well, in 2014, I didn't do anything related to literacy. 2015 to 2017, I was assigned one emergent literacy course that I taught in the spring. And man, did I hang on to that, because I loved teaching that class, and it gave me that opportunity to just inch my way in to the literacy courses. My faculty and my dean at the time were listening, that I was very interested, especially in early literacy. So in 2017, when we revamped our programs, I was assigned all of the undergrad and MAT early literacy courses that were based on our LeGrand campus. So it was slow. And in the beginning, I was teaching using texts that I didn't necessarily like. But through that time, I was also able to find an ally in our ESOL program coordinator, Tanya Lubas. And she came into my room one day and I had the teaching reading source book text on my shelf, because that's what we used at University of Oregon with our special ed teachers. And she said, "Oh, I love that book. That's what I used when I went through my ESOL programming." And I'm like, no kidding. So having her as an ally was a huge turning point, because I was able to get that textbook, because it wasn't just me saying it, was her also saying this is good for ESOL kids too. And we were able to get that textbook in there. Still had some balanced literacy textbooks in there. So some of my teachers that you'll listen to tonight will tell you that they probably were just totally confused, because here they were reading the teaching reading source book, listening to me, and then reading other things that didn't match up. So I'm sure it was all a little bit frustrating and confusing. But it was a baby step to get us toward where I was trying to go. In 2019, we had a new dean hired. And he came in and asked some questions I had never been asked before. He said, "What do you want to teach?" He asked me, well, he knew my PhD was in special ed, and he said, "Maybe we should do a certificate in autism." And I said, "I don't really know anything about autism. I would much prefer to do a certificate in dyslexia." And he said, "Well, then do it. What are you waiting for?" And so with his support, I started putting that dyslexia concentration, is what we ended up calling it, together. And then in 2020-21, I was granted sabbatical. And when I started to think about, in 2019, when I started to think about what I wanted to do my sabbatical, I thought, what I've always wanted to do is a reading clinic. I've always wanted a place where families and kids could come to get the help that they needed, that was so hard to find in our remote Eastern Oregon area. Wasn't really sure exactly what that was going to look like and what kind of model would work for us. But I was determined to see what I could do during that sabbatical year. At the same time, Oregon advocacy groups, including Decoding Dyslexia Oregon, were starting to put pressure on deans of the colleges of education across the state. And during my sabbatical, I got an email from my dean, and he said, "I just received this." And he said, "I'm not sure what to do with it." And I said, "Can I respond?" And that letter came from Decoding Dyslexia Oregon and some of those advocates. And that was sort of what set me on the path to really connecting with Oregon Kids Read and Decoding Dyslexia Oregon, and really started to put some pressure on our College of Ed. And to be honest, it was that pressure that gave me the courage also to go, we need to be doing this, and we need to make shifts fast to make sure that we don't have any more teachers leaving our program that aren't prepared. So when I came back in this year, 21-22, we opened the reading clinic, we launched the dyslexia concentration in the summer, and I also was able to take over the reading programs. Our reading program directors stepped into our Master of Science director position. And she asked me if I was ready to take that over, and I said 100% yes, was very excited to have that opportunity. It was actually the first position I hired for, or I applied for at Eastern Oregon University. They hired Amanda, and she's fantastic. So it was a good hire, but it was exciting to have that chance to take that over. So what I decided, and this was partly through conversations with Amanda Villagomez, who I took over the reading program with. I don't think she would mind me saying that she also has a child who is a struggling reader. And what was really cool during my sabbatical is she allowed me to tutor her during that year. And that, I think, was also a turning point for Amanda, realizing that, she was trained in secondary, and her her focus really had been in those older kids. So really knowing how to teach young children how to read was something she realized was out of her wheelhouse. So when her and I started talking about revamping our programs, she said, well, what about really following, making our classes follow the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope. So she had spent a lot of time doing her own reading and educating herself. And we decided that was a really good way for us to structure our programs. So our undergrad program has 3 reading courses and 1 writing course that our teachers take. And for this first iteration of our program, we are looking at those first 3 classes and actually just put that to the College of Education last Friday, and we're in the process of voting on that. But this is what it will look like if it passes, which I don't have any doubt that it won't. So our Education 314 will be a class that's sort of an overview of all of our of the big ideas about reading instruction. So they'll learn about the simple view of reading, they'll learn about Scarborough's rope, they'll learn about assessment and how important that is to reading instruction, and just really those foundations of reading instruction, including that big 5. So that will be kind of that first overarching foundations class that they'll take. From there, we'll dive more into Scarborough's rope. So Education 318 is the next class that they'll take. That will focus on this bottom part, and really already did this year, where they're doing phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, and fluency. But you'll notice there are smaller arrows from this side. One thing that I want to make sure my teachers walk out of that 318 class with is that it's not just about word recognition and only word recognition in K through 2. We also have to be simultaneously building this language comprehension side through read aloud and through great conversations and all of those things that will help them build vocabulary and understanding more about their world, so they have that background knowledge coming in. So I don't want it to be completely compartmentalized, so it will be a small part of that. But then 322, the next class that they take, will be more about the language comprehension side and how we build that and how we make sure that we get kids to that skilled reading place. Both of those classes will have elements of talking about assessment and what that looks like at the word recognition level, what assessment looks like at the language comprehension side, and how they can drive instruction based on that assessment data. So this is sort of our progression of those reading courses for the undergrad. They take 314 in fall of their junior year. 318 is in winter of their junior year. And 322 will be in fall of their senior year. But in the meantime, they have a practicum EDU 309C, which is related to 318. So that practicum will be based through the reading clinic and will be based solely on those kids who are having difficulty at the word level. So they're learning how to tackle that piece. And we'll talk more about what that is looking like this year. And our MAT program, they only get 2 reading courses, so it looks a little bit different. 625 is more jam-packed with both the overview and that word level and word recognition and fluency. And then their next one will be focused on fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So it's just more compacted, but same content. So one of the big reasons why I took sabbatical and why I was focusing on a reading clinic is because I was frustrated by our practicum experiences. Give me just a sec. I'm getting dried out, talking too much. And similar to what Shaheen said, oftentimes, most of the time, I should say, when they would learn from me structured literacy approaches in 318, and then we would put them in classrooms where they saw nothing but balanced literacy. So they never got to experience even seeing what I was talking about, let alone getting to practice what I was trying to teach them. So my first idea for this reading clinic and this practical experience really was conceptualized around our pre-service teachers and how to give them those experiences so that they were better equipped to teach those beginning readers when they started. And as I started looking at different reading clinic models, I found the DC reading clinic, and that clinic is based out of the DC school district, and it is for in-service teachers. They are serving children in their district who are struggling readers, but at the same time, they're training their in-service teachers to use structured literacy approaches. What was key for me in this model was that there was a stipend attached to that. So these teachers weren't asked to just do this on their own time with no compensation. They were paid for their training time and paid for working with these kids outside of their contract. So I started talking with regional educator networks in our local area, and they started showing some interest in partnering with me to provide that training for in-service teachers, and also having them help kids within their classrooms. And I don't think we all really knew exactly what that might look like, but we started to sort of delve into that idea. And the first thing that happened was that I trained some mentors, which I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I think what happened for me during that sabbatical time was realizing that if I could train in-service teachers, then I would all of a sudden have places for my students to go and see in schools what structured literacy looked like. So it was important for us to come at it from both sides, not just pre-service, because we all know as young teachers going into a new school who uses maybe only balanced literacy and trying to go out on your own would have been a really tough task. So if I could train those in-service teachers and the pre-service teachers sort of simultaneously, eventually we wouldn't need reading clinic training anymore, because we'd have those places for our pre-service teachers to do their practical experiences. So with that, I came up with this merged idea. And this is the mission of the EOU Reading Clinic. Our goal is to improve reading outcomes for all of the students of the Eastern Oregon region. Luckily, we're spreading past that at this point, but we're working to accomplish that by giving that practical training experience to both our pre-service teachers and our in-service teachers. Both general and special education are welcome. In fact, I'm also training some paraprofessionals this time in the reading clinic, which has been a really great experience too. And giving them some of those tools has been empowering for them as well. And also, as equally as importantly, we're bringing this research-based structured literacy instruction to these kids who need it the most, who are really struggling to meet those reading benchmarks. As far as the in-service teachers go, that's within their own classrooms. They have those children that they have been working with. So this is kind of how the clinic has rolled out for us. We received funding from the Oregon Trail Regional Educator Network to train both our mentors and trainees, and starting in the summer of 2021 and finishing up the last part of our contract will be winter, spring 2023. And each of those sections, they will pay for up to 20 teachers and mentors each session. So they've put up a pretty big chunk of money to provide those stipends for teachers, to provide books for the teachers to use in the training. The first cohort, we used both speech to print and Kilpatrick's Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties. We backed off on the second one because that first group thought that was a lot to take on in 10 weeks, both of those texts. So we dropped one and added a little less intense book. But this is how this is rolled out. In summer of 2021, I had 6 fabulous mentors step up and say, yeah, I want to be a part of this. And I trained them, got them ready for teacher trainees that would start in the fall. In the fall, I only had 4 teacher trainees sign up. I was a little disappointed, but I'm not disappointed anymore because they turned out to be 4 fabulous women who really took everything to heart, and you'll get to hear 3 of them talk this evening. In winter spring right now, I have 16 teacher trainees and 9 mentors. So those 4 mentors all came back, or those 4 trainees all came back and added to our mentor pool. So they are mentoring this time. In summer of 2022, I already have more than 20 teachers signed up. So some are on the waiting list. And Milton Freewater School District has also contracted separately to have 10 of their primary teachers per session. So I'll have 30 over the summer. In fall, in fall, more than 15 teachers have applied through my program, and then we'll have another 10 from Milton Freewater. But I will say I haven't even advertised for fall, so I fully expect that one to fill up as well. I did in December 2021 receive a Meyer Trust grant, and I got that for 2 years, and that will really help us pay for supplies. It's helped me hire a student worker who has worked for support for me. She's been fantastic, and helped to buy out some of my contracts so that I have time for clinic management, which has been key for me. So with that, I have 3 women with me today who are in-service teachers, and I'll let them introduce themselves and tell their experiences, but experience as teachers, but I've kind of prepped them that I want them to talk about their in-service teacher training. And they all went through EOU. So, and I don't take any of it personally, but they're going to tell you about their pre-service program, and then also about reading clinic training and what that has done for their experience as teachers. So I'm going to start with Crystal. Do you mind starting?
No, I saw my name first, so I figured it was me. All right, well, I hope I hit all the boxes. I'm Crystal Wilson. I teach kindergarten here in La Grande, Oregon. And as Ronda said, I graduated from EOU. So I had a lot of courses that I took with Ronda and of course other professors, but I've known her for a few years. So like Ronda had said before, honestly, I don't feel like I learned a lot how to teach kids how to read. It was really confusing. I remember learning a little bit about phonics and phonemic awareness from Ronda, but also from other professors, learning that sounding out words and things like that was not what we were supposed to do. So it was kind of confusing. And quite honestly, I feel like I learned more in my practicum placements or student teaching, but even with those experiences, I learned that in the first grade and kindergarten setting that we were supposed to have them basically guess how to read. They weren't sounding out words. They weren't given decodable books or anything. They were given books that were way too hard for them. And with that, they were retelling a story, so making it up, using the pictures to guess, and a lot of books that were pattern books. So if they got the first, sentence, they were able to read the rest of the book, but they weren't actually reading, they were guessing. And so that's what was modeled to me. And I don't think it was really super concerning to me because I was a student and I was going to school to learn how to teach kids. And so it wasn't really like something that I thought about as, oh, wow, I don't think that's the right way. I was just like, oh, this is just the way you do it. So I'll just listen and then apply that. And so that's what I did. And going into this is my second year teaching, but my first year in kindergarten, I had tons of scope and sequences laid out, and everything it said was, retell the story, use the pictures, things like that. And so that's what I started doing. And my friend Becky McIntosh, she's also on here. She was one of those mentors that was trained with Ronda first, and she said, Crystal, you've got to do the clinic. It's awesome. And she was already applying all sorts of stuff. So I went ahead and signed up. And the first orientation and meeting we had with Ronda basically said we shouldn't do this, and this. And I was like, well, Ronda, that's exactly what I'm doing. Kind of stressed out now. I'm doing the wrong things. And I think really what got it for me was all the statistics that she brought up and all of the research that she just showed, like, this is statistically speaking not what we need to do. And so for me, it was just like, okay, well, let's see, like, what do I need to do? How can I apply this? And that's exactly what she gave me. And, as a first year kindergarten teacher, it was a lot to take on, but I'm really glad I did because I have seen so much growth in my kiddos. And I think starting at the very beginning of the year, I did it in the fall. It was a little bit easier because I was starting with fresh kids, from the, foundation from the bottom. And it was really, really awesome. So I worked with a one-on-one student. We focused on letters and, all sorts of things. And he knew like 4 letters going into it, and now he knows all of them. He knew all of them after the 10 weeks that I worked with him and did my course with Ronda. And so it was really, really encouraging. And so now I apply all of that to my reading groups now, and it's just awesome. I mean, my kids apply the tools that I've given them without me even having to remind them, and now they apply them when they're writing as well and spelling. And so it's really, really exciting. Yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of growth, and it's really hitting home with the phonemic awareness, and my para's doing Haggerty and all sorts of phonics. And so it's really nice to have everyone working together on the same page. And now I have lots of other people in my building that are interested too, which is really, really pleasing, because now we're starting to flow more fluidly. And I know when I send my kinders to first grade, they're going to be learning the same things. And it's just going to really flow. And I feel like we're doing great things, but it all started with Rhonda's reading clinic and with her research. And so I'm eager to continue to learn, and I'm a mentor now, and I'm going to do it in the summer, and I keep learning more and more. And it's really awesome to see the growth. So I'm not sure if I said everything I was supposed to, Rhonda, but
you did great.
You know how I get, I just start talking and I don't stop. So
So Danica, do you want to share a little of your story?
Sure. I'm Danica Bond. I'm a first grade teacher here in Pendleton. I've been a second grade teacher, and I was a Title I teacher my very first year. I got my teaching degree as an undergrad at EOU with a reading endorsement. I was the last class to get an undergrad with a reading endorsement. I was so proud of my reading endorsement because I'm like, I can teach reading. But looking back, I knew the terms. I did really well on my reading endorsement, the test to get that endorsement, because I knew all the terms. I had studied it, but when it came to applying that to children, I was kind of at I was at a loss, and I was this new Title I teacher, and they were saying, oh, well, we teach Fontes and Pinnell, so just teach them the whole word. And my kids weren't learning anything. And I was trying to do different things, and I was kind of held back, like, no, just go with the curriculum. They will learn it. And my struggling readers that I saw didn't. And I just, I felt like a failure. That's what I knew. Luckily, my mom, she's here too. She's been teaching forever, but I taught a summer school with her, reading summer school with her since I was a 7th grader. And she did do a lot of phonics. So I did have that basis. But my practicums and my student teachings didn't have that. So I didn't have a good place to apply what I wanted to do, or I wasn't seeing it in a different way. So I went back and got my master's in curriculum instruction with a focus in reading, hoping to get some more reading classes that would kind of lead me in another direction. And those were kind of similar. They were kind of getting better, but kind of similar. And then I even did my thesis, and Ronda was my advisor on that. So Ronda has not been able to get rid of me in all of these years. But I did that on reading fluency and using repeated readings. And like we talk about in the class sometimes, like I shouldn't have done that. It was wrong, but I found it wasn't working. But in that moment, I was like, okay, repeated readings. I've heard this term. It's got to be something that will work for kids. And again, it didn't. So then COVID happened, and our kids are lower than, ever. So luckily Rhonda started this, and I jumped on the wagon. My mom was being a mentor, but I was like, yes, anything that Rhonda is doing with reading, I want to do, because some of the courses we weren't fully prepared for, but Rhonda says, you know better, you do better. So I have to move on. And I think we're all doing that, but she's so passionate about reading, and I am too. And I'm like, I need to follow somebody that's trying to make a change in this. And so in that clinic, I just found pieces that were actually applicable to teaching. In our undergrad, in our graduate courses, you're learning all these terms, but we don't really know what to do with them. What does that have to do with teaching the struggling reader? What does that term actually mean? We hear phonemic awareness, and I can tell you what it is, but how do I do that with a student? In this reading clinic, it's breaking it down. It's also telling you the why behind it, so you know why you're doing it. Like, why is this having an effect? The other thing that I learned in the reading clinic is really about assessing, progress monitoring. What do I do with that data? Because those are all things in teaching programs you hear a lot about. Oh, we need to assess, you need a progress monitor. But how do I do that and what do I do with that information are two different things. So having it broke down in this reading clinic has been just game changing, and watching some of the skills and strategies I do with my kids and the growth they're making, I'm like, this is it. Like, they're reading. The start of this year in the fall, before this program started, I work with 3 other first grade teachers, and we're like, where do we begin with these sweet children that weren't in school last year? And they really are low, and they deserve that. And so I was doing this reading clinic, so I took on all of our lows, and just the growth that they're making, like, it just makes you want to cry, because they're telling themselves that they're readers, and they're telling other kids that they can read now, and they have skills to decode and encode and pull words apart and read decodable readers. And it's just fascinating, and it makes you really want to be the change and make sure this is going out to other people. And other teachers in our district and stuff have seen that and are willing and wanting to know more, because every teacher wants to do better, but we don't know how sometimes, and the information isn't out there until it is, and we can do it. So I just think with where we are as a state after COVID, with kids that are struggling behaviorally and socially and reading and math and all academics, we need to help pre-service teachers that are going into college to become teachers, so that they are ready for really where we are as in education right now, because it's hard, and we need all of those skills, and those kids need more skills to help decode and learn how to read, and learning that I can help kids with dyslexia finally, but it's also helping all my kids read. That was one of the biggest game-changing moments in reading I've had, that I can finally help these kids, and I know how to help them, but by doing that, I'm helping all kids. But I think this also needs to be more professional development too, for teachers that are out of college and out of going back to school, but they still want to do their best and want to learn and want to help all of their kids. So I know Ronda's making just a huge wave in a movement right now, and just lots of people are on board, and it's just really awesome to be a part of and to watch. So thanks, Ronda.
Thanks, Danica. I want to clarify Danica's statement about repeated readings, because it was a big aha for all of us, in that her second graders were not automatic at the word level, and we were jumping past that and having them do repeated readings before we had them solid. Not that repeated reading is always not the right thing to do, but for her second graders, it was definitely the wrong thing, because they weren't automatic yet. Thank you, Danica. Rebecca, are you still on? I know she wasn't feeling great today, so I don't know if she was able to stay.
Yeah, I'm still on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you okay to talk?
Yeah, I don't know how long. Sorry, everyone. I have an ear infection, so it sounds really loud in my head. So if it sounds like I'm shouting, I'm sorry. I have no idea how loud my voice is. So Crystal, I'm sorry if I'm shouting at you. So my name's Rebecca Emmons. I teach at the Pendleton School District. Like Danica, I also teach first grade. I taught kindergarten for a year, then I did second grade, and then I moved to first, and I thought this will be great. I went through school. I know where they should be coming in. I know where they should be going out, and boy, was I wrong. So like Danica, I took one of Ronda's courses but that was through my master's program. So through the bachelor's I got through EOU, I kind of felt prepared to teach reading. I was scared to do small groups because they taught me how to do a lesson plan for whole group. They never taught me how to plan differentiated instruction or how to just level them out and how to move them from one level to another so that they're not stuck in that level from October to June. Because once they've mastered it, they really should move on. So then, because I still wasn't feeling confident in my reading instruction, I decided to go back for my master's, again through Eastern Oregon, and focus on literacy. And I learned a lot of strategies. Like Danica was saying, it was very similar to my bachelor's program. I did learn some new stuff, but I didn't feel as prepared as I was hoping to be to teach reading. I graduated last June, and starting this school year, I was like, okay, I'm still scared. Like, I still don't really know what to do. And if I talk to certain teachers, like the ones who have been teaching in my school for over 20 years, they're like, oh yeah, do this. And I was like, well, I know that's not really what I'm supposed to do, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I just know that's what not to do. So I heard about the reading clinic just through a training with Ronda over the summer. She had mentioned it. So I immediately signed up for it. And it was amazing because I had a mentor who I could meet with weekly to talk about how my students were doing, not just the target student I was working on, but all my students in general. So she could help me work on that differentiation I wanted to. And I was really lucky because my mentor happened to be in the classroom right next door to me. So we could talk whenever we needed to. Ronda provided us all with a lesson plan template that really broke up step by step. What are the key components that they need to focus on and how to plan that, how to teach it. And it was amazing because it wasn't like going through the first program that I did where it was, you need to hit every area of this lesson plan in order to be successful. It was focus on part of it. You probably won't hit it all in your lesson. In fact, you probably shouldn't hit it all if your lesson's only 10 to 15 minutes because then you're going too fast. So it really helped me pick and choose what I was going to focus on each day. Having the course text that she mentioned earlier that we're able to get, that was really nice because a lot of the stuff I hadn't heard of. I had never heard of the science of reading until this reading clinic. And I mean, I had heard it in passing, but I was like, okay, yeah, it's like science. Like, yeah, you've got to know the ins and outs of it. But I didn't know what that meant. So just having that resource and being able to share it with others at my school has really lit a fire. And I think that's why this reading clinic is growing so much, because we all like to share what's working and people want to know how our kids are making this growth. And so they're wanting to see it too. We do have weekly Zoom sessions where we get on and we talk about our readings and any questions that we had. And I remember sitting next to my mentor and I got really emotional. And this was during a breakout room. And Rhonda popped in and I thought I was on mute. And I was just shouting about how I felt I was failing my students. And I was like crying because I just felt everything that I was doing was wrong. And her and my mentor were saying, you know, what you need to do now, so know better, do better. Don't look at the past because that's going to beat yourself up. It's going to beat your students up. Change it. It's okay. And so the very next day, I told my students, this is our new routine. This is what we're going to do because I'm learning new things just like you're in school, I'm in school, and I'm very honest with them so that they know that I'm still learning and we're all human. And so the big change that I had implemented was doing dictation on whiteboards 3 days a week. And their confidence in their spelling, their willingness to try and sound out words and not immediately come up to me has improved drastically. And they're calling themselves readers. They're calling themselves writers. And they push each other to do better. They use the power of yet. And it's huge because with COVID and all of this, they came in with such negative mindsets at the beginning of the year. They were so focused on, I should be able to do this, but I can't. And so I'm stupid. And now I can't do this yet, but I'll keep practicing. And so just that confidence that they're growing, and they're first graders. So that's huge. And then another big change that I made was I stopped using leveled readers in my small groups because I knew they got too hard too fast, but I wasn't sure what else to do. And Rhonda was really big on use decodables. And I was like, yeah, but those are too easy for them. No, they're not too easy for them. And it's on the skills that they've been taught. So let them practice it to build that confidence. And one of my parents in a conference was crying because he said, you believe in my kid, and now he calls himself a reader, and he comes home every night and he wants to read to me. And that was huge for that dad. And I was like trying not to get emotional in it. But I mean, it's good that we're seeing growth and that the kids are seeing it too, and that they're owning it. So like Crystal, I am a mentor this time with the reading clinic, and I'm doing it again in summer. And any other time Rhonda needs me, she knows how to contact me, and I will jump right in.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that.
And with that, I'm going to sign out so I can go lay down.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to share my screen with you again. Next, I want to talk about how we rolled it out for the pre-service teachers, because it looked very different than what I expected. At the last minute, Jen Schubert has introduced me to Ignite Reading, and that probably happened late last fall. So I met with the CEO of Ignite Reading, and she proposed a partnership that we use our LeGrand pre-service teachers to train with Ignite Reading. And you'll have to Google Ignite Reading when we get off of here, because it's an amazing nonprofit that provides really intensive intervention, 15-minute shots with kiddos 5 days a week. And they were able to partner with Morrow County for them to use our Ignite tutors that are our LeGrand undergrads. So those students from LeGrand have been training with Ignite and have been providing that remote intervention all of this term. And I do have Martina Heredia here to talk to you a little bit about that in just a minute. But not all of our candidates could do that because of the schedule. They had to be available every day from 8 to 9:30. And our Gresham campus and our hybrid cohort had many students who were also either working as paras or had other jobs, and their program has been set up for evening classes, so it wasn't going to work for some of those students. Some of the Gresham cohort did end up doing Ignite Reading in some of the hybrids, but the ones who were employed were not able to. So they use the same materials that that Ignite uses, and I trained them myself, and they're working with students within their local placements in person. So the schools helped us refer kids that would be part of the clinic. And as you probably noticed by now, the clinic is not really a place. It is usually within in-service teachers' own classrooms or our pre-service teachers' practicum placements, with the exception of this Ignite cohort. So one thing, I brought the text that our students are using in the Ignite practicum, as well as our Gresham and hybrid cohorts. And it's a fantastic, very straightforward text that actually provides a curriculum for them. And so it gives them a very good structure of how to go about identifying a level for kids and working them through foundational reading skills. And so that is actually also the text that I picked up with the in-service teacher cohort for this current cohort. So they're using that as well as the Kilpatrick text. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Martine and have him tell you a little bit about his experience in undergrad. Oh, could you show that again? Sure. Oh, the text? Yes. How to plan differentiated reading instruction. Sharon Walpole and Michael McKenna. All right, Martine, do you want to give us a little overview of your experience so far?
Yeah, so I am currently a junior in the elementary ed cohort at EOU, and we've been doing Ignite now for about 7 weeks. And so I'm just kind of go over like some of the training, some of the challenges, some of the new skills that I acquired, and then some of the rewards that kind of go along with being in the program. So I'm just gonna kind of start off with what you sent me, Rhonda. I realized I'm gonna mention this before we start. The intensive intervention part, because I don't have any kids that need intensive intervention. I don't actually really know what that looks like. So I'm just gonna not speak about that. Is that okay? Okay, cool. Okay, so the first week of the Ignite training, we just started training with all the protocols that are in this book that Rhonda just showed us. And in this book are a bunch of protocols where you teach kids based on where they're at in their reading. So there's a bunch of them. There's like blends and digraphs, basic alphabet knowledge, multisyllabic decoding, R-controlled vowels, using letter patterns, using letter sounds, R-controlled vowel, I already said that one, vowel teams, and there's one more that I'm missing here, but I can open that later. So basically, they train you with the protocols the first week, and they also go over Scarborough's rope, but the CEO, I don't think she really knew that we had gone over that during our classes. I don't think she expected us to be as advanced with the knowledge that we had because we took Ronda's class beforehand. So that's what the first week looks like. It's training with the protocols, navigating the Google Drive where you're gonna basically access everything, all of your student materials, your assessments. I'm talking like literally everything. And after the first week, you go straight into teaching those kids. And what I really like about this program is that you get to work with students one-on-one. So the level that they're at is very easy to see because you're the one that's progress monitoring them. And so you get to see the progress that they make and you get to influence the progress that they make. So after the first week, you get 2 students, and then another 2 weeks goes by and you get another 2 students. So you get a total of 4 students. And throughout that, you basically just keep track of lessons. And I wanted to mention that one of the things that's really helpful for us as students, I think, is just that theory to practice, because we talk about Scarborough's rope so much and how you can't have language comprehension without word recognition and things like that. So really getting to apply that through the Ignite program has been really helpful, because it really, at least it gives me a lot of confidence for when I actually go into teaching, that I know how to teach kids how to read. So that's what the training looks like. Some of the challenges that we have faced is that a lot of us felt like we didn't have a lot of training with the protocols, just because the way that the time is split up, you only get 15 minutes with the students and to teach your lesson for that day. But you get 30 minutes of practice every day. But it just wasn't enough for us. 1 week of training and then just to go straight into it, I think we were all a little bit intimidated, but we ended up resolving that and saying that we didn't really have enough practice with the protocols or the assessment or the progress monitoring. And now we've been doing that every single day, so that's gotten a lot better. So it was just some organization stuff, but the CEO worked really well with us, and we ended up fixing that. So I think we all feel a lot more confident. The next thing is the assessment with students. So I know that, again, I said it was intimidating for a lot of us in the cohort, just because we had never worked one-on-one or actually assessed a student. Because when you assess a student, you determine what the next protocol is that they are going into. But the Ignite program does walk you through that, which is helpful. But like I said, it is a little intimidating and a little uncomfortable when you're not that familiar with all of the assessments. And then same thing with the progress monitoring. Another challenge was navigating the Ignite folders, just because there's so much in the folders that you don't really know where to start. But Charlotte does do a very good job of being very direct and sharing her screen and showing you where to find things. So that's something that just gets better over time, but that is one of the things to expect, so it's not like a big surprise. I think one of the biggest issues sometimes for us as the students is that a lot of the times these students are in classrooms. They're not really in their own little space like the teachers are. So a lot of the times they can face Wi-Fi issues, or it might be really hard to hear them because there's background noise going on in the classroom or things like that. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was that I think the hardest part of the program is using your time wisely. So in the book, How to Plan Differentiated Instruction, it gives you the protocol, and the protocols even give you the amount of time that you should be spending. So for example, I have a student I'm teaching blends and digraphs right now. So for high frequency words, it says to spend 5 minutes on that, 5 minutes on sounding and blending, 2 minutes on whisper reading, 2 minutes on partner reading, and 1 minute in choral reading. And the reason that is so difficult is because you're working one-on-one with these kids, but that doesn't really give you an opportunity to get to know them as much. So what I've kind of done is every 2 minutes, I just kind of ask my student how their day's been. Like usually Mondays, I ask how their weekend's been, and we just have a little bit of conversation. So you do get to know your student, but the 15 minutes a day is a little iffy and a little tricky because you will not always get through the lesson. All right, next thing. I want to talk about some of the skills I've acquired because of the program. So one thing is I feel like going off of a script, which I have never done. Actually, no, I have. Rhonda, we practiced the scripts in your class at one point, so that really helped actually. But it's kind of interesting to see how you use a script and how maybe you might want to go a little bit off it depending on your student, because you're working one-on-one with them. It allows you to see what they're really struggling with, and from there it'll teach you how to go off the script. So one of the things that I do, I'm going to use the blends and digraphs again just because that's what I teach. I just kind of came up with this. So the script says sometimes two letters work together to represent one sound. SH represents sh, but I kind of like to go a little bit more in depth and give my students kind of a way to remember it. So what I do is like, shh, like this is how we're going to remember it. It's like telling your annoying classmate that they need to be quiet, like shh, and then that's how they remember it. And I'm like, how do we remember it? And they go shh. So just little things like that, learning how to go off the script. Half of teaching is scaffolding and acting, so getting to actually apply that, it's very helpful. Another thing I think I've acquired is instant corrective feedback. So one thing that Ignite really pushes is the fact that if students get a word wrong, say like a high frequency word, or they didn't sound and blend a word right, be like, okay, actually, let's try that one again. Like, what are the letter sounds? And then have them look so they can actually decode and not just have them guess. Another thing that I actually was not expecting was online classroom management. It's very different because this practicum is on Zoom and not in person. So doing things like, hey, can you keep your eyes on the screen for me? Or just little things like that, I did not expect to learn coming out of this program, but I did. So I guess that'll be helpful in the real world classroom too. Another thing is, this one has to do with teacher preparation. But because you only have 15 minutes with each student, you want to make sure that you have all of your materials ready. So every morning before I start, I have like 3 tabs of just my Google Drive. So I have all my lessons for my students. So that's a big part of teaching too. I feel like that I didn't really know that you have to have your materials ready in order to be efficient with your time and make sure that you're getting through the lessons. The next thing is bringing the party. So this is what we're actually working on right now. So after a while, because you're following a script, it gets really repetitive and it doesn't seem as fun to the students. And even to you as the teacher, just reading that script over and over and going through the lessons, it's not really fun. So what we're learning right now in Ignite is how to bring the party, is what we're calling it. And it's just a bunch of engagement strategies. And I feel like that has been really helpful because I'm like on lesson 14 with one of my students, and I used one of those things, one of the engagement strategies, which they actually have a whole Google Docs for that, which is very helpful. And it helps you get out of your comfort zone, and it helps your student get out of their comfort zone, so that then the learning is fun, because obviously that's what we want to do with learning. We want to make it really fun. So my example for this week, my student in blends and digraphs was like on lesson 14, and one of the cheers was, all right, don't make fun of me, but one of the cheers is called the McDonald's cheer. And basically you go, whenever they do something good, like say they sounded and blended all the words correctly, you can be like, all right, like let's do our McDonald's cheer. And you can be like, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm loving it. And you just draw the M. And my kid would not stop talking about McDonald's. But that's the most engagement I've had since like lesson 7. So those things really work. And again, I wanted to highlight that it really gets you out of your comfort zone, but it also gets your student out of your comfort zone the more you're into it. So that's very helpful. And I'm going to touch on the last thing, which is just kind of the rewards. Because you're working with the student one-on-one, it is really, really rewarding when you can see that they're just growing, like they're learning how to read and it becomes easier. So I remember my first kid in blends and digraphs, this was a different kid. He came in struggling with some of the sounds, and then we ended up testing out of this protocol actually. And now every day he tells me, can I read the words by myself? And I'm like, no, I can't let you do that. I have to let you sound and blend. But just hearing that from him, it makes me feel really good and makes me feel like I'm doing my job. And like I said, it does get repetitive after a while, but it's so rewarding when you see these kids grow. So yeah, that's my experience. I don't know if you wanted me to touch on anything else. Like,
That's great, Martine. Thank you. I really appreciate that. All right. At the end, we will have a few minutes so you can ask Martine and the other women who went through the clinic if you have any questions for them. I kind of want to finish up with sort of how we're working on other parts of our reading program, including this graduate dyslexia concentration that we have and our reading intervention endorsement program. We've done a lot of changes so far in terms of that, of the reading and intervention endorsement. The graduate dyslexia concentration is brand new. That graduate dyslexia concentration can be a standalone training, and these are the classes that are part of that training, what you see at those first bullets. We are also now subbing out some of the courses from the dyslexia training into, or concentration into, our reading intervention endorsement program. Eventually this next year, my task will be merging those two programs, where you'll do the dyslexia concentration, which basically will be those foundational classes, and then an additional 9 credits that would be required for endorsement, because that's a 24 credit program. We have already updated all of the textbooks in our reading endorsement program so that the content is following the science of reading. We're also coming up with master Canvas shelves. Canvas is our learning management system. So we're using those Canvas shells to make sure that even adjunct professors are using some core content that needs to be included. Our next steps, IDA accreditation, thanks to Dr. Jen Schubert and Dr. John Urang. They helped to purchase some release time for me this winter to help me work on getting ready for IDA accreditation. So that's ongoing and coming up hopefully sooner rather than later. Some key change factors and why we were able to see this change at Eastern Oregon University is partly because we are small, which makes us more nimble. As I said earlier, I had that ESOL program lead. She was an ally for me fairly early on. But in addition to that, I have some really open-minded faculty on my floor that are they had upper elementary background and secondary background. So, but it was their open-mindedness really that was able to say, you know, I don't really know how we teach beginning reading, and they were willing to listen and learn and understand. And Karen Gomez is on this call with me tonight, and she is doing letters training with me right now. And we've just had some great conversations. And again, like I said, finding some common ground between that balanced literacy approach, especially thinking about it in terms of that language comprehension side of some really important key ingredients from balanced literacy that we can take with us. But I will say that the pressure from the advocacy groups really helped me to find my people, and finding those allies was super important for me to have that courage to come out and say, let's make some changes. And really that green light from my dean was huge in moving forward. So some of the recommendations I have for other institutions, it really is important to find your allies in and outside of your institution. So look at special education faculty, look at the ESOL faculty, see where you can find some common ground. I really, really found a lot of allies within those Facebook groups. These are some of them that Training Reading Rocket Scientists is a fantastic one that is specifically for higher ed faculty, but Science of Reading the Community, Science of Reading What I Should Have Learned in College. A lot of the big names are weighing in those groups, and it's really fun to have the group of people to work with. Other institutes and organizations are great places to look to. Mount St. Joseph University is fabulous, and they've been super generous with helping me as I've worked to change classes and programs. There's sample syllabi from several different places that I put here in the slides, and I somehow need to figure out how to share these slides with you. So Lisa, if you have some ideas. And then really it's partly educating your administration, and that's the dean, the provost, so that they know about reading science and that need for change. So those are really some of my big ideas, and that I think can help you as you move forward and try to make changes if you're in that higher ed space. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. See, there's some in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing.
So Rhonda, if it helps, we can kind of read out some of the questions to you so you don't have to track what's going on in the chat.
That would be great.
We have one from Tom, and Tom, if I paraphrase and leave out critical information, please feel free to jump in. But the question is about using assessment data. So specifically, it sounds like oral reading fluency data to continue to expose readers to more complex text and close achievement gaps for students that are multiple grade levels behind. And just sort of your thoughts on how we can use those assessment data to help increase the complexity of text students are reading.
Well, I think oral reading fluency is an important first stop. So when we see that a child is not performing at a grade level place in oral reading fluency, then we need to dig deeper. If there are issues that we need to address that are somewhere in that Scarborough's rope, that's important for our teachers to know how to do that. As far as text complexity, if they're sailing through their grade level oral reading fluency, then we know we have a child that needs some enhancement and needs some greater text complexity. So I think that oral reading fluency is just a starting point. It is that indicator of either not being proficient at their grade level or being proficient, but it doesn't tell us everything. We have to dig deeper to find out more.
Awesome.
I don't know if I answered that question.
Thank you. We have a request to share some of the textbooks and readings that you're using within the dyslexia concentration. So perhaps we can maybe gather some of that information from you and disseminate that out to the group.
Yes, definitely. That's a long list.
Sure.
But I start that dyslexia concentration with Speech to Print, Louisa Mote's book. But they are also at the same time reading Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz. It's a good starting point for that. I'm also looking at some other texts, but I'm happy to share like all of my texts and readings that I'm using. And I will say that Mount St. Joseph has been great about that. They give fantastic resources for all of their different courses, including assessment, which was a harder one for me to find, and a text that I wanted to use. So I use a lot of outside readings for that course.
Thanks. So now we have Jonathan, who's asked about handwriting. So given that research is showing us that direct handwriting instruction is a fundamental tool for literacy, which is echoed in the ODE literacy framework, how are you helping your teacher candidates be prepared to use handwriting instructional best practices for struggling readers?
That is a great question, Jonathan, and I'm probably not doing that as well as I should. Handwriting is something that we talk about in EDU 318, and we talk about it as being a good way to solidify students' knowledge about letter names and letter sounds. And we know, and they talk about using handwriting in terms of spelling as well, but it isn't something that I have done a great job with up until this point, and one of those places where I would like to make sure that we strengthen that, because it is such an important part of what they need to do. What I'm finding with pre-service teachers, there's just so much that they need to know, and it's just so hard to give them everything that they need. And I don't think we can expect to give them everything. We have to know that we're giving them a good solid foundation that they can build on. But handwriting needs to be a big piece of that. I agree.
Absolutely. Emily is asking about how the reading endorsement program supports students with learning how to teach the science of reading and the research on the science of reading, while simultaneously preparing students to take the praxis exam, which still asks questions based on the whole language approach.
Yes, isn't that a problem? Yeah. To be honest, I don't think our students have had a lot of difficulty with that praxis, even though there are those questions on there. And I don't explicitly come out and say, you're going to see this on the praxis, but just know it's not not the best practices. And it really hasn't been a big issue for our students up to this point. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you're talking about the reading endorsement praxis, which I know that Rebecca and Danica have both taken, and Rebecca just recently took the newest version. I think it's 5302, and did fabulous on it. So I feel like they're able to navigate that, but don't ask me how.
Okay. Dia has asked, based on your research, what have you seen as the best screening tools for districts? There are a wide variety that are available, but not all give specific student data in the critical skills needed to be able to plan instruction.
Yeah, and I think this, for me, has been the biggest obstacle in working with school districts, and actually working with these teachers in the reading clinic who are in these various school districts. And some are using curriculum-based measures, but many of them are using other kinds of measures and teachers are feeling frustrated by not having good information that they can use to drive their instruction. So I'm U of O, so I'm a big curriculum-based measure fan, and I actually teach all of my reading clinic teachers to use DIBELS 8 now. But any of those curriculum-based measures, DIBELS 8, Acadian, CZCBM, I think are great for giving us an indicator of the students that need extra supports. But it's really, I guess, a crapshoot as far as what is happening in the schools and with the different districts. But basically what I've told districts is, you've got to find those screening tools that are efficient, reliable, and valid. And the efficiency piece, I think, is a huge part, just so we make sure that we're screening all kids and finding out who needs support right away. Yeah, Shaheen, I also use the core assessments book with our pre-service teacher candidates too. And actually our reading clinic candidates, after they finished with a screening measure, then they did core assessment for the phonics survey. And so many of them said that was huge for them to really nail down exactly what their kids needed. And in this differentiated instruction text, there's also assessment that they use in that one that will show them exactly which protocols to put them in and gives them a little more information also.